Hello everyone, welcome to Take Charge of Your Health. I'm your host, Zose Stojkovic. You may have noticed I'm very passionate about mental health, and it's because it affects the whole body. We can't have good physical health if the health of the mind is not addressed, and vice versa. I also got very excited when I discovered a while back the brain is not hardwired, but it's pliable, and that God can give us new hearts or minds. As we read in Ezekiel 36, verse 26, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. We also read in Healthful Living, page 234, the religion of Christ is one of its most effectual remedies, for it is a potent soother of the nerves. Page 235, a sore, sick heart, a discouraged mind needs mild treatment, and it is through tender sympathy that this class of minds can be healed. And page 235, a person whose mind is quiet and satisfied in God is in the pathway to health. Today, we have Jenifer Skues on the program, who is a health psychologist. We have a few programs recorded with Jenifer, so you can find them in the live section of our YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about relationships, how to establish, maintain, and restore our relationships. I would like to know how many of you have noticed that our relationships with people suffer more recently. And we know that God's word and his 10 commandments are about our relationship with God and others. So this topic needs a lot of our attention. Let's welcome our guest speaker. Welcome, Jenifer. Thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you. It's a very important topic we're going to look at today. I often get asked about.
Yes, I am definitely very excited to discuss relationships. And let's start with a word of prayer and we'll get into our discussion. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for this opportunity to come together and discuss about our minds and how it works, to discuss about relationships and how we can maintain good relationships with you, of course, and with other people as well. We know that the relationships are under attack today, and we want to educate ourselves as much as we can to have good relationships with people. We thank you and ask all of these in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Okay, so the program is called Living Loving Relationships. So what does the title mean?
Okay. When I was asked to do this program quite a few years ago, because of my experience, I sort of did a lot to develop the program, and I thought, well, what am I going to call it? And I did it Living, Loving Relationships, because there were two aspects. One, relationships have to be alive. If they're dead, then it never works. So they are a living thing. A relationship is living. But we also want to, I guess you could say, live in loving relationships. So we want to live those relationships. So we want to have living relationships that are alive. That's basically how I saw what we needed to look at.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And what is a relationship and what does it involve, Jenifer?
Relationships are actually very complex, but the basis of a relationship is about how we connect. And I think there are different types of relationships. So how do we connect, first of all, with ourselves? How do we connect with God? And how do we connect with others? And our relationships can go from being unhealthy to healthy. And certainly we need that multifaceted connection. I believe starting with Jesus, because he's our model, relationship model, and that's our connection to God. Because when we have that, then we can have healthy relationships with other people. But look, science has done a lot to look at the basis of relationships, because relationships involve a lot of insight, I believe, a lot of knowledge, a lot of skills. I call it toolkit. And one of the things I do is teach people skills on how can you have a healthier, better relationship. And if you don't connect well with yourself or with God, it's impossible to have relationships with others. But there's lots of interesting things that science has found out about relationships, because I find everyone's interested in the dynamics of. So this is just looking at some of those. And it takes up to 4 minutes to decide whether you like someone or not. Isn't that interesting? And you might have met someone, oh, I don't really like them, but within a few minutes you change your mind. And so there are reasons why we do this, and it's usually based on our own self-perception or perception we've had of people who look like that, sound like that, who are like that. And also a lot of people want to love and be loved. But apparently when we do meet someone, when we fall in love and we look into each other's eyes, our heart rates synchronize. And I believe this isn't just romantic relationships. It's also been found with the parent-child relationship, even in the womb, that the heart rates actually synchronize when we're in that harmony. So imagine our relationship with God. Our hearts are going to really synchronize and be recharged, I believe. Apparently when we fall in love, it's similar to the neurological effects of cocaine. So which people go, whoa, so we don't need drugs. You know, when we fall in love and when we have relationships, we're really uplifted, and we don't need a drug to do that. But it's interesting that it is similar to those neurological effects. In other words, what's happening in the brain when we fall in love is similar to the effects of taking cocaine.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's pretty powerful, isn't it? So also hugging and cuddling, or even looking at a picture of a loved one, they actually help reduce pain. It produces particular chemicals, one of them, which we'll talk about a bit more, oxytocin, and that's called the love hormone. But that is where it actually helps in pain reduction. So this is why people who are in pain, if they don't have that connection to hug and cuddle and be touched, particularly with pain, oh, don't touch me. Well, that actually, touching in the right way can be really helpful in that. So too much emotional trauma can damage the heart. It can actually damage the brain as well, emotional trauma. But it, as you said before, the brain is pliable. It can do some repair work. But there's a syndrome called the broken heart syndrome. And I have met someone who had that syndrome, and she'd been to the doctor, high anxiety. I'd been treating her for the anxiety and that. And she went to the doctor and he said, oh, you're having a panic attack. And she'd had multiples. And she said, no, I'm not, it's my heart. And he kept arguing with her. And finally, he sent her to hospital, and she was actually having like a heart attack, but it's called the broken heart syndrome. And what happens when you have a broken heart, and she'd had multiple griefs and losses, and if we don't deal with them and heal from them, it can multiply, and the heart starts to overpump blood and it floods areas, and that's when we have the same symptoms as a heart attack, but it's not a heart attack. It's very rare to die from that. It's something we recover from. And the doctor she saw, the specialist, pointed out it was a broken heart syndrome. So it's actually a medical term that is used. Okay. If we also have people in pain, and I believe this is emotional pain as well as physical pain, mental pain, when we hold someone, you know, some people say, oh, I just want to be held. It's not about cuddling, it's about holding. And when someone's had a trauma, if you hold them, it helps to reduce the trauma, impact of the trauma, but it also helps to relieve pain and stress. And this is why we love pet therapy, holding animals, right? Having that, it helps on all those levels. Expressing gratitude towards others. And today we have, I know in psychology circles, they're talking about a gratitude, having gratitude as a therapy. We've always known, because of our, what I understand biblically is to show gratitude, to be grateful for things. And when we show that gratitude, it's not just a thing of, I feel grateful. It's a matter of expressing it and saying, I'm so grateful. Thank you for doing those things. When we do it with people you love, it causes an immediate spike in your own happiness. So both people benefit when we have gratitude. I get people to do a gratitude list, for example, to show what they're grateful for in their relationships, but not just to do that, because people don't know, and they start and they go, I'm really grateful for a lot of things. Well, how about you tell your children, your husband, your friends, and let them know your gratitude for things, because it's a very therapeutic healing factor. Okay, so when we look at relationships, as I said, they're fairly complex, but the essence is love. Doesn't matter what sort of relationship, and we know that God is love. And that is our model. Christ is love. He's a savior of love, which he expressed totally throughout his life. Even when he was being abused and compromised, he always showed love, and we can learn from that. But it's about attachment, which we're going to talk to more about, on how do we become healthy attachment and when it's unhealthy, about caring. And we're not just talking about others, it's about ourselves and others. If I don't care for me, how can I care for others? And then, of course, it's about intimacy. And intimacy isn't, most people think, that's the physical intimacy, but it's more than that. Intimacy is that connection, that heart connection. When we have that heart connection, you grow that intimacy rapidly, and that is the perfect love cycle then. So we feel healthily attached, we can show caring to ourselves and others, and we feel connected or intimately connected. And this explains why, for me, because I've learned to do those things, I find I meet someone, particularly if they're hurting, and the work I do, when I connect with them, you can notice the intimacy and they feel safe with you. When we have that, intimacy is a safety factor, where they feel connected and they trust you. So this is where intimacy goes way beyond just the physical connection, even though that is vitally important. Okay. If we feel connected and that intimacy is there, we don't mind if people touch us or hug us or whatever. Okay. So
True.
Yeah, so there's a lot because your question was, what does relationships involve? And there are so many dynamics, and we've just touched on a few things, but that's what we're going to explore today. So we're going to look, a lot more at what are the dynamics of these relationships? How can we grow in a relationship, and how do I know what the problem is? And how far back does it go? So we've got lots of things we're going to discuss and explore.
Yes, but already I think we are learning some important things, and one of those things is that it is learned to have good relationships, and I guess to do our part, it is something that we can learn. And also whether we like a person or not, you said it comes from our perception of ourselves, and that's very interesting as well. The way we perceive others also comes from, I guess, how we perceive ourselves. That's what you said. And gratitude as well. I guess I'm assuming that as we express gratitude more, whether we feel like it or not, the brain will catch up as well eventually, right? It will become more of a natural thing to do.
Yes, there's a principle that I learned when I was actually working at a psych unit many years ago, from quite a while, and it was the principle: fake it till you make it. And therefore, saying, well, I didn't feel like it, so I didn't say it. But it doesn't take much, because when you express gratitude and you say, I really appreciate the way you did that, you might not feel it at that point, but the other person responds, because often they don't get that feedback. And then I find you catch up emotionally, because emotion is a bit like jet lag. So if we actually do these things. It's like smiling. I mightn't feel like smiling, but when I smile at someone, which is part of connecting, then and they smile back, it resonates with my whole system neurologically, and it can uplift me as well.
Yes, and there is science to it, and it does
Mhm.
work. I have tried that.
It does work, I
Yeah,
guarantee.
yeah, definitely. So I guess then it's called a relationship for a reason because it involves more than one person. So then, how can we form and maintain loving relationships? But also,
Okay.
what if someone feels like they enjoy their own company? Is this normal, or should we be in a loving relationship to feel truly happy? How does it work?
Yeah, well, that's a sort of a big question, I guess, because a lot in that. Um, but certainly, we know what it's like to have failed relationships, and the majority of people I work with, speak to, or even just people I know, they don't trust easily, they feel let down, they feel hurt, they haven't known how to resolve it, they carried it. And that's that sort of failed relationships, or any, whether it be friends, family, whatever, causes a lot of stress and unhappiness in our life. So we've got to really work on successful relationships across the board, and we can learn to do that. Um, if we can't build and maintain at least one healthy relationship where we feel connected, that's all it takes to feel okay about yourself and give happiness. I find depression, I get people who are depressed and they are very isolating. They isolate in their depression. And then people don't want to know them anymore because they're sick of them being depressed and miserable. And they give them all this, like, just snap out of it, or you've got nothing to be depressed about. So they don't feel listened to, heard. They're not, it's not working for them. It is the loneliest place. And that's where that isolation can turn to suicide, right? Or not wanting to be here anymore. So this was evident when we look at COVID, and the mandatory isolation. We had a lot of months where, and some states more than others, where we were not allowed to connect, family, friends. Even if your loved one was dying over the border up here, you couldn't go over. You couldn't. They wouldn't even give you permission to do it. They were in hospital. They were isolated in their death. They couldn't go to a funeral. So that's the extreme end. But there's a lot of studies done now on what happened in that isolation in COVID. They found, starting with children who were isolated, and then adding into that, we'll add in social distancing. So they weren't allowed to touch. Even some of its stupidity was in homes. You're not allowed to touch and cuddle. Well, not that anyone could see, but certainly out, we had to keep socially distancing. We couldn't touch, couldn't connect. Face masks. That was another really terrible thing for people. It's very unhealthy. Evidence says it doesn't make a great deal of difference to getting COVID or not COVID, or even viruses at the time. So if we look at what I call true science, there's a lot of interesting information around that. But with children who were socially distanced, isolated, and wore face masks, they didn't develop emotionally, they didn't develop mentally. It was like a retardation factor, and they really struggled. They became, even at a very young age, really depressed. Even young kids doing suicidal, didn't want to be here anymore because of that degree. Because children to develop need social contact, they need to play, they need to connect. So this is where, when we have societies, and it's not just here in Australia, this was worldwide. I've
Mm.
known other cultures who have distanced children and they don't survive well at all. But also adults didn't. They became angry, anxious, hurt, couldn't connect, forced to isolate. And if you're a social person, I don't mind isolation. I like my own company. I like being on my own.
Mm.
And I can do, if I'm online or whatever, I can do it that way. So I cope very well with that isolation because I never felt isolated. I could still work online. So I could still talk to my sister, for example, or friends. So I sort of worked at it a bit differently psychologically. But for a lot of people, and they couldn't go to work, right? Isolation at
Mhm.
home, they couldn't earn an income. It was multifaceted. But that isolation caused major depression, anxiety, and our suicide rate went up markedly. so across the ages. So this is where isolation is so bad. And when we talk about isolation, we're talking about the need to connect and not feeling connected. This
Mm-hmm.
is where, and this is where I find spiritually people who are connected to God, who, even if they're on their own, and this has been evident with people who've been incarcerated or compromised and they can't connect with people, but they work on their relationship with God, even in their isolation, and they get through it. And I
Mm-hmm.
find that in these circumstances, if we put God as our primary relationship, particularly through Christ, then we will be right. It's where I found reading
Mm-hmm.
the Word, praying, looking at things spiritually, and praying for others. Right? Because isolation causes a lot of self-focus. Start feeling
Yes,
sorry for ourselves, and that's dangerous, as we know, in relationships. So
that's
yes,
true.
so yes, absolutely. So anyway, just with your question, I don't think people prefer to be isolated. People are social beings. They need to socialize some way. Some people just have to have the physical contact, and it's a lot worse for them. I didn't need that, and then I've got pets as well, my cats.
Yes.
So that again, if you're in an isolated position, and that was interesting because a lot of people went out and got pets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some of them didn't survive well once the isolation was over, some of the pets, I mean, but that was a big gap for people. So they did certain things that they could do to get that connection. Okay, so
Okay.
connection is important. I think we can be really happy if we like our own company, because I love my own company. But I don't just sit bored, and I never have time to be bored. I'm always busy or doing something or learning or enjoying something. So I don't get bored, but some people do. But I think having a good relationship with yourself is crucial to have a relationship with others, and also to look after yourself and enjoy being yourself, enjoy being with you.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what I understand as well from it is that we don't have to be dependent on people. We do have to have good relationship with ourselves and God as well. Um,
Uh-huh.
Not to, I guess, shrink from isolation, because these things can happen. But also, from what I understand, from what you're saying, I understand that we don't necessarily enjoy our own company, but maybe something has disrupted that balance in, wanting to spend time with people. Maybe, we just don't have that good connection, which needs to be restored, perhaps. But
Mm,
some of the things you mentioned as well, what disrupts the healthy balance in relationships is that perhaps lack of physical touch or physical contact, and
mhm.
connection with God. So, what other things can disrupt that healthy balance in the relationship, or the ability to connect with others?
Okay. As I said, you've got to connect with yourself. If you connect with God, and in the Bible it talks about to love God, to love ourselves, and love our neighbours as ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
we can't just love someone if we're not having that loving relationship with God. And I know when you connect with God, your heart resonates, your spirit resonates. The Holy
Mm-hmm.
Spirit works with you. So it's not an empty thing. And even if you feel disconnected from God, you know His presence is there. So it's that connected relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we do that, we can learn to love ourselves, because no one's ever perfect, and this is one of the problems in relationships. We go in expecting perfection from the other
Mm-hmm.
person and ourselves, and we fall short of that, and that's when things start to go downhill a bit. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a real balancing act. So I believe we can, and connection is a key factor to connect with others, connect with God, connect with ourselves. And it's not about, some people might be watching this and going, well, I don't go to church or anything. It's not about that. Church is about connecting with like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not connecting on that spiritual level, then going to church is just a disconnected experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same as in the world. So it's really about us personally and how we function personally, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, in ourselves being healthy to be healthy with others. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where, so when we look to others for that, the balance is tipped. Because if I rely on someone else to be happy or to like myself, and I've done that over the years, I've been through all those facets of my life because that's how I was um, trained when I was growing up. They were my models and that sort of thing. Again, we're going to look at that in more detail further down in our program. But it's like we have to work with ourselves, we have to be right with ourselves. If not, it's a depressing environment. We don't cope well, we become too self-focused, and
Mm,
that's the only relationship we have. So it's
that's true.
focusing out.
Okay. So being right with God, being right with ourselves, and then
Hmm.
I guess working with others
Yes.
in
We
that.
can't we can't be other focused if we're self focused all the time. So one of my things is when things aren't going right in my friendships, relationships, or whatever, and I'm not happy, I go, well, hang on, what am I doing? Is there something I'm doing wrong? What can I change? And then I look, what am I expecting from that person? So there's lots of different things as we go through the program we'll learn to do, but that's important to not just blame the other person. And often we do. You know, when I get people who come to me, often, well, she changed this and he changed that. And it's not about that. It's what can you change? We can't change others. We can only change ourselves. So that's
Mhm,
part of that juggling act. Hmm.
definitely. And I guess sometimes also I've noticed that it's easy to create relationships, but it's difficult to maintain them. So could you
Yes.
maybe explain a little bit to us how do relationships break down?
Okay. Um, well, when we have a look at the average span of, say, a marital relationship in Australia, and this is from our ABS statistics, is approximately 12 years, and I don't think it changes greatly. Okay. When we're looking at marital relationships, there are 2 points of separation or divorce. One is after the first 2 years, and that's when the honeymoon's over. I know, I'm out of love with you now. I don't have those feelings I had when we started, which is dangerous because, and that we're going to explore further too at some point. And the other one is after about 20 years, there's a huge spike in separation and divorce. And that's when the kids have grown up and left home. And mum and dad look at each other and say, well, hang on, who are you? I don't know you. We're not really
Mhm.
connected anymore because they've connected with the children, but not with each other. So this
Yes.
comes back to that connection again. So this is where in if people want help in their well, particularly marital, even with their children, is to look at those variables. So we have to
Mhm.
continually work on and grow a relationship, whether it be a friendship or not ever, but they're interesting to statistics. Now, some of the things that are important or establish relationships or lead to breakdown is one, our program beliefs and values, and what we've learned about relationships, and our models give us that demonstration. How our parents did or didn't get on is what our beliefs and values in relationships, how they had, whether they had friends or not. So it's that early modeling. Poor communication skills. Now, we're not born with those skills. We're born with about 50% of the personality that is developed and grows, and some personalities are more extrovert, so it's easier to communicate, some are more introvert. We all have a communication style. But when we
Mhm.
don't have the right communication skills and we haven't learned to communicate effectively, that is a problem. Our expectations in relationships, if we have unrealistic expectations, if we expect something the other person can't deliver, again, this is across all relationships, children to adults, then it won't work because I'm expecting and you didn't deliver, therefore I'm hurt. I'm angry, I'm upset, or I feel rejected or abandoned. So we have to really, and this is where I'm saying, start to look, well, hang on, what am I expecting? Why isn't this relationship working? They're not giving me meeting my needs. What am I expecting? And have I
Mhm.
verbalized expectations? Boundary violations. So when I'm inappropriate, and that can be verbal and non-verbal, yelling at someone, glaring at them up too close and personal, and we're more likely often to do it with children than other adults, which is the interesting thing. But boundary violations, when we step over the boundaries, how we defend ourselves, our defense mechanisms, what we do to protect ourselves, and they're learned at a very young age. We learn to protect based on the models and what's happening around us. Our personality, which we said there's about 50% of our personality genetically, and that is modified. You know, the brain is pruned after birth and then it's modified. And gender differences also have a huge impact on our relationships, because the male and female gender has different brain function, different ways of doing things, and often either or gender will expect the other person to be like them in the way they think and feel and action, and it never works. And then we put pressure on each other because you're meant to be, blah, 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 blah. You know. And I know gender nowadays has a lot happening in gender. We're not going to go down that track, but I'm just looking basically at the relationships we know, like marriage, as we know it. And again, it's the gender differences.
Yeah, so no matter how much we want to blur that, there are differences.
Oh, absolutely. The actual breakdown process, and this is where you all would have heard of Dr. John Gray. He did the Mars and Venus. You know, the gender different men are from Mars, women from Venus, and I believe we actually are. When you look at the principles, we are very different. We need to learn about each other's gender on that level. And he did what he called the 5 R's of relationship breakdown. First one was resistance, and that is where we're sort of not have as many feelings for that person. Might be after that, going through that first 2 years, 18 months, and things start to settle a bit, and we start finding criticism and fault finding. You know, you used to do that. You don't do that anymore. And, you know, I'm a bit sick of this. And we start criticizing. And then when you criticize too much, you know, and I was brought up with a very critical parenting style. So I learnt the art of criticism, and I've had to unlearn that one because it brings misery. And then you start to dislike the person because all you're seeing is what you're criticizing. And then you blame them. If they weren't like that, you know, we'd have a happier relationship or friendship or whatever. So that is the resentment. We build resentment, okay? And unless you recognise, and if I start criticising someone, I'm at stage 1 here. I'm resisting. Why am I criticising them? I better check it out. I better have a look or balance it out. That might be one of their things they do I don't like. What do I like? You know, so this is where sometimes help to do that. Then if not, I build resentment. Then I start rejecting. That the 3rd R is rejection. So then I might show open dislike and blame. You know, particularly when we look at marriages and where they head, or even friendships at times, where we show by our verbals and non-verbals, or we say, well, you always do that. Why do you do that to me? It's your fault. If you hadn't done this, you know, we do all that blame thing, and we show dislike, particularly by visual expression. Then we start repressing because nothing changes and we're both bouncing off of each other. So we start to shut the heart down and shut it down. So that means emotionally we're now going into that area of shutdown. So we don't feel love, we don't feel affection. And when you keep internalizing and repressing your criticisms, your fault finding, what you dislike, your blaming, how you do it, your actions in it, we can become the volcano and it erupts. So the final R is rage. And when you've seen someone in rage, it's not good. We have a lot of rage in our society worldwide where people seem to be mild-mannered people and they go, I don't know why they did that. It can be male or female. They suddenly erupt and do things that are bizarre or even life-threatening. Internalizing the rage, putting it onto yourself, your self-harm. If we express it out, we can harm others just by yelling and screaming and becoming violent or aggressive. I mean, rage is the extreme end. All right, we start with frustration. But so this is where if we recognise we're resisting, criticising, if we make sure, hang on, I'm starting to feel resentful, I better check this and work with it, feeling rejected or rejecting others, right? And then I'm sitting on it. I haven't a voice anymore. I'm not saying anything. Or if I do, I blame them because they don't like it, or, you know, so you can see how we just do all that breakdown process. And then I get angry. Anger turns to depression, by the way. People who suppress anger and emotional pain get very depressed. Anxiety as well, but certainly depression.
Yes, I've noticed that. And
Hmm.
what's interesting to me is that the Bible talks about, and Jesus talked about hate that
Mm-hmm.
is equal to murder in a sense. And that was
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I read somewhere as well that the author was saying that under enough pressure, you will kill as well if you hate. And
Yes.
that's what I've tried telling people as well that ask me sometimes, well, what do? I hate this person. And I'm like, well, just
Mm-hmm.
be careful because Jesus was talking about that. And with under enough pressure, that can turn into murder as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, we are killing ourselves, though, if not the other person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, and it's a very good point because when we hate someone, we're projecting. And
Mm,
we talked about when you are intimate with someone or you're close to them or you're connected, the heart synchronizes. Once you go into that level and you hate, you disconnect that.
mm,
And I've sadly heard parents, even one parent, I hate you, and it's a child. And I go, oh, that poor child,
wow.
she's just disconnected on the heart level. It was a long time ago, but I cringed at that one because one, we can express it, but even if we don't express it, the fact that we hate someone, and it's usually for what they did to us, we hate them because we're
Yeah.
feeling hurt and angry, we're actually giving them, it's like putting a curse on them. It's a really bad vibe, and you're in their presence and whoa, they feel it. They go, what's wrong with you? Or they don't want to see you anymore. They don't want to connect, but they don't understand why. So we
Mhm.
project it, and the Bible's right. It's like if we think murder, we've murdered, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
But careful
And
what you think.
careful what you think.
Yes. Check
Yeah.
your thinking. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Because hate is not really that someone else is guilty for. It's usually something that is a feeling comes from our own heart, right? So we need to check our own
Hmm.
heart.
Well, we feel
Um,
heartless when we hate. We're not connected to the heart. It's an awful space to be in. It affects, and I know we've done a bit of work on the brain and that before, but what you think resonates to every cell of the body and it brings every cell down. So a negative thought about someone brings you down totally. And that means you don't get the feel good hormones, you're getting really bad hormones and energy loss and chemistry deteriorates. So a positive thought reverses it.
yeah, and we did a presentation on mental health a couple of weeks ago, and one of the the facts that I mentioned was that apparently 6 minutes of negative emotions can suppress your immunity for 21
Mm.
hours. So
Yes,
that's
it's powerful. Powerful. We underestimate. So people who spend all day being negative, and we do, we learn it. Is
yeah,
all we see is the bad in someone. We don't see the good, or we go the other way, see the rose-colored glasses, and don't realise they have faults that we need to deal with as well. So it's, again,
yeah,
it's this balancing act.
yeah. So we'll talk, I guess, about love a little bit more in depth. But what I
Mm-hmm.
want to know is what I guess I've wondered for many years is that when people say they love each other, but is it possible that there is space for two people in an intimate relationship mainly, where
Mm.
two people are involved? Can you love two people at the same time?
It's a tricky one for people because I know when you fall in love, and it's a true love, and it's a very real experience, particularly when we include as a Christian, when we have God as part of that relationship, it's very powerful. But also, the Bible teaches us that we stay married to one person. And the interesting thing was, even there's some good examples in the Bible of David's life, Joseph's life, where having more than or Jacob, more than one wife led to so much friction in the family. There was jealousy, there was hatred. The children grew up really dysfunctionally, and the parents paid for it because they had too many people involved. And we're talking about a marital situation here. I have heard of rare situations where says they're happily married to two people. One of them married twins that I heard about years ago, but how it
Mm.
successfully went, I don't know. Because as human beings, we are meant to be monogamous, and we're married. We have one person in the marriage, but to divide yourself equally, um, or the two, say it's the male with two women, that's the one I've heard most of all, but I do hear the other way around. But then both women aren't going to get the same satisfaction in the marriage because it's divided. The husband's divided them. Okay, so
Mm.
I don't believe it will ever work. But in saying that, you can fall in love and get married, and it can be a great relationship, a very loving relationship. One of them dies. I believe you can fall in love again. I believe there's more than one person we can love,
Mm.
just not to include it in the same, that we can't marry two people in that sense.
Yeah.
Certainly, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, it doesn't work. And then other people have gone on later on after losing a loved one like that, where they've met someone else and married and had another successful marriage. So, yeah, and we can have more than one person we love, but we still have to be faithful to that one person, unless it's a friendship. We can have multiple friends that we really love, so which is a different
Mm.
story.
Can we
Does
then
that
make,
answer?
yeah.
Hmm.
So then, what I'm gathering from this is that it's a decision. You can make a decision that, okay, since this person is not in my life anymore, I can open up my heart to someone else, not in the same relationship, to have someone else as well. So then, while you are married, it's a decision really to allow yourself to maybe fall in love with someone else or invite someone else into the relationship, right?
Yes. Now, if you're married either for the wrong reasons or it's not a good marriage, you don't have that connection. And this is where I believe to really bulletproof your marriage, you have to have that spiritual relationship, both of you with Christ
Mm.
as the head and each other, that because you get through things that way. When we lose sight of that or we don't have that, then it's easy to not be fulfilled in a relationship, and that's when we're going to be attracted to someone else.
Mm.
And look, I've had friends, worldly friends through the years, and even friends generally, whether they're spiritual or not, who've had affairs, ended up leaving the marriage, divorcing, and marrying the person who they had the affair with, and then they get sick of that one and they go on and have another affair, and that the affair
Mm.
then gets divorced. And so you can see it comes back to the dilemma is in the individual who isn't fulfilled by their relationships. It's not
Mm.
working. And there are some people who are addicted to falling in love. So they love falling in love, but once that honeymoon's over, that's it. They've got to go and fall in love again. So you can see how it creates problems. We need
Yeah.
to be faithful to one person. And if we fell in love with them, we really did when we met, that relationship can be worked on even if it's starting to deteriorate. There's a lot you can do. There has to be a lot of pain and like that from those breakdown levels getting to that point of rage where you're really abusing the other person. Then even if you loved each other in the start, it's almost mission impossible to get back to that point when it's got to that stage. But
Yes.
generally, relationships are redeemable if they work at what is the problem in our relationship, how can we work at it together, and how can we learn and change and grow, which means we've got to stop looking at the problem that we think it is and start looking at a solution. So it's shifting focus, and that's where some good counseling can help with that, definitely.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good explanation, I guess, for anyone that was wondering. But the whole theme, like, from what we understand, the love seems to be the driving force in any relationship and in this imperfect world. So, a lot of people claim they love each other, but they will be unfaithful or they will be abusive. And it seems like
Mhm.
each of us has different limits of like when we stop loving someone. So
Mm.
um, can we talk a bit more about what is then real love?
Okay. Um, it's a hard question to fully answer because different people see love a little bit differently. But I think real love is when we don't just feel it, we actually show it in action. And
Mm,
I believe real love has to come from the heart and the mind. And this is where, when we started, that God will write his law of love in our hearts and our minds. And I believe if we base it on that, then we can have real love for God, love for others. But I think if we're not well ourselves and we're not coping, we've got to be careful not to fall in love as a rebound or a fix it. I
mm,
know people who do, they keep falling in love because it'll fix all their problems. So we really can't do that. True love, I believe, is displayed. I mean, if you've met a couple who truly love each other, even friends who show great love to each other, you can see it, you can sense it. It's not just what's said, it's the connection between them, it's how they treat each other, right? So it's very dynamic that way because we've got worldly love, which is based on conditions, and we've got the spiritual aspect of love, which is really, it doesn't mean there aren't conditions, but it's unconditional in I'll love you even if you make mistakes. And that's what we need to do with children. I know parents I've worked with whose children have gone into teen years and got into drugs and left the home, and the parent never stops loving them. They'll take them back in a heartbeat. So
mhm.
this is where, to me, that is true love. We really love someone to the point that we'll forgive them, we'll work with them, as a Christian, I'll pray for them. That. So the true love doesn't just stop. You might get very hurt by things because you truly love that person,
Yeah.
but it doesn't stop the love. We still love that person.
Hmm.
Even if they pass away, we still love them.
Yeah. That's amazing. And that is unconditional. And it just reminded me of as soon as
Mm.
I found out that I'm pregnant, I started loving my child. I hadn't met them yet, but I
No?
loved them and I was trying to protect them. So there is definitely something happening in that brain or heart level that you can't explain why
Yes.
you love the child that hasn't done anything for you, but you're trying to
Yeah,
protect them. So it is unconditional, I guess, in that
it
sense.
is. And it's also a biochemical process. We're more than just a feeling. We're made up of chemicals. We're made up of, in our relationships, electrical impulses that move us. So, in one level, it sounds simple, but on another level, we're actually very complex and we withstand a lot. But if we keep going the wrong way, of course, we can wear ourselves down, but it doesn't take much to correct it. But that thing
Mhm.
of really loving, you can't always describe it like a mother's love. I
Mm.
haven't been a mother, but I am a mother to some people too because they never had a mother. So part of me
Mhm.
understands, but I've not had that thing of where I've carried a child and given birth, which is exclusive to the mother who has.
Yeah,
It's that bond. Mm.
yeah. But then again, from what you were saying as well, even a mother and child love, it doesn't necessarily have to be so unconditional and um, beautiful and all of that. There is also something that disrupts that connection as well, right? It's
Mm.
mothers
Mm.
don't always feel connected and everything, so that's why we're discussing this to find out what it is that disrupts.
Yeah. We had looked at exploring this further in the next session where we'll look more fully at what happens in
Mhm.
those early years if a mother, for whatever reason, can't show the love the child needs and how disruptive that is to development and growth. And we've all had a mother, we've all come through from conception to birth. So we can learn a lot about ourselves by studying that sort of thing as well as
Mhm.
maybe people around us or the children we have. It helps us to understand a lot, but it's definitely important to be able to learn to love. And I think it's something we need to learn. But I believe when your love is shut down and you don't trust people, it's again comes back to that spiritual journey with a God who we can love and trust.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And you were also talking about the falling in love side of things,
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer. And
Yep.
you also said, which was interesting, that the oxytocin that's produced doesn't necessarily have to be towards, I guess, the opposite sex, or that can be, in general, that can happen in different relationships as well. If, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so that's what we understood. And also, that did you say that was the cocaine effect that makes you feel happy and high?
Absolutely. Yeah, it gives you a lift, it boosts you, puts you on a high. So, because what we have is a very powerful cascade of chemical reactions when we open the heart and the mind to someone and fall in love. It's actually a chemical process, because when you think about it, when you fall in love, how rational are you? You know, you don't need to eat much. You
No.
can just live on love alone. You know, it's just, we do, people are, oh, they're in love because they're, just gazing into each other's eyes and nothing else matters. So, and it is biochemical. And Dr. Arlene Taylor, who's done some great work in this area, and she's got some wonderful books on all this sort of thing as well. She called it the
Mm-hmm.
tsunami of romantic love, where there are three chemicals involved when we fall in love. One, as we said, is the oxytocin, but that's also a help for intimacy, bonding. It's also to do with the sexual physical relationships, which helps reduce anxiety. Oxytocin can calm you down, less stressed. So it doesn't matter when you're in love, it doesn't matter what's happening around you, you don't get stressed by it. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
chemical, which is interesting. The other one is serotonin, which we're probably more familiar with, because serotonin is a mood stabilizer. And when we don't have enough serotonin, we get depressed. It's related to anxiety. So we get a lift of serotonin. And there are actually foods and other things that can boost serotonin. But when we do that, it helps our well-being. We feel great. When you're in love, you feel good, but it's a serotonin. It's not because of something else. And the last one are endorphins. And I don't know what you know about endorphins. We call them the happy hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And endorphins give energy, they give a boost, they really pick up the mood. They're the brain's opiates as well.
Mm.
So this is where it's like you can see why people are attracted when they're really down and out to take opiates, to try
Mm.
cocaine, which is so dangerous. I'm certainly far from recommending any of that. It becomes addictive because we're not getting it naturally. But we have natural opiates. We have natural things that will give us those experiences. And it's when people who become addicted to those things often have loveless relationships, have come through a traumatic, maybe childhood, teen years. And children who they found are well adapted, when they do grow up to have relationships, they might try something to boost those chemicals, but they don't continue because they don't become addicted because they already have a good balance. So it's
Mm.
those who are looking for it and can't find it in relationships. So, and in the falling in love phase, those three chemicals or hormones can last for 18 to 48 months. So we can be in the love phase for a year and a half, 2 years, up to about 4 years. But they've also found in studies with romantic love that when you have a really connected, loving relationship in your marriage, that you go on your honeymoon, but you actually have a honeymoon phase, it might slow down, but that's when we work at other things in the relationship. Don't see it as the end of the relationship. We need to grow love in other ways. And it's when couples do that and don't see it, well, that's the end, we're not in love anymore.
Mm.
But they can actually resurrect that chemical reaction when you go on a romantic weekend or a holiday. You might go out and have a romantic dinner, and it gets those things going again. So that process can be revisited throughout the relationship, but we can't live on it all the time. It's not good for us to stay on a high all the time,
Yeah.
if
That's what
that
I was
makes sense.
about to ask. Like, is it
Yes.
realistic to think that's going to last the whole marriage life.
No. No, it's not realistic. Enjoy it while it's there. Also, look at what are the qualities of the person I've fallen in love with. Are we compatible in other ways? Because that's what's going to carry it through. If we've got different beliefs and values and they don't match and they're going to be annoying to each other, once we fall out of love biochemically, that's what's going to take over. So during that phase, you also need to work on and often opposites attract. You've probably heard that one before, but that's because we need to grow. We each have qualities the other person needs to grow with, so we can share each and help each other with that process. So there is a lot in developing a really healthy fall in love marital relationship.
So I guess, good things to remember is that we can't expect the high to last long, and it's not even something that's good for us. And when that happens, we need to start working on the relationship to find out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do love in other ways. That means have dates, go out and do things, stay connected. And that was that 20-year point where couples then split up because they don't really know each other, because they never kept the relationship going. And I mean, you know how hard it is with young children to focus on building a marital relationship. It will suffer along the way, but if you keep coming back, and I find in any marriage or even a friendship that it's not about doing it all the time, having that connection. It's the quality when it's there. So you might feel separated because you're busy, like as a parent, raising kids, working, but when you come together, you reconnect. This is why it's important to have that quality time. And at least if you can do it once a week, even if it's just at home, sitting there, sharing, talking, enjoying a meal, doing something together where you start to reconnect, keeps the relationship healthy. Right? It's the same with friendships. And I find when you have that connectedness and it's there, like I have friends and I might not speak to them most of the year, and then we ring each other and it's like we've not disconnected.
Yes.
It's like we leave off from where we start where we left off. It's like there's not been all these months in between. And it's the same in a marriage. When you reconnect, even though you've been busy during the week or 2 weeks or whatever, the reconnection, it's like that distance changes, right? It doesn't matter anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
You did obviously give us a very, very good formula of how to form happy, loving relationships. You also told us what disrupts the balance in those relationships. So you talked as well about emotional trauma, that it's one of the reasons. So can we talk a little bit more about that, and what causes emotional trauma in the relationships, and obviously how that affects the person's well-being, and obviously the relationship around them. And also, if you can talk a little bit about at what age can you start showing symptoms of emotional trauma?
Okay. Emotional trauma for a child can happen in the womb from conception to birth. So, and again, we're going to explore more of that as we go in our sessions, but it, it, it can happen at any time, any age. So this is where what constitutes emotional trauma, and it is relative. Some people, children and people, are more resilient, and that's to do with personality. So what is traumatic for one might not be emotionally traumatic for the other person. But the bottom line of trauma is when we feel abandoned, rejected, and unloved. So when people are abandoning us or they're not happy with us, and we looked at different stages of decline, if someone is yelling at you can be emotionally traumatic. Even someone who just says a gruff word or something that is very rejecting of, and it might just be things, oh, you don't look very good today, I don't like that on you, is enough to be traumatic for one person. Another person will laugh it off. So, but certainly that thing of disconnection, particularly at an early age, any form of disconnection or lack of approval is emotionally traumatic in any relationship. So does that make
Yeah.
sense?
That
Mm.
does make a lot of sense. And also
And
when, mm-hmm,
I was going to say, because you asked about the person's well-being,
yes.
when we are emotionally traumatized, unless we can deal with the trauma, it starts to backlog and set up a platform where our well-being is compromised. And this is where, again, mental emotional health suffers. And it's the bottom line is usually rejection and abandonment is the bottom of that platform.
Mm. And yes, I guess we will talk more about that.
Mhm,
So then takes us, I guess, to the physical contact as well. You talked a little bit about that. So what
mhm.
is the aim of the physical contact, like holding hands or hugging each other or just being there in the same room, just looking at each other?
Well, when you have touch is very powerful. They've done some interesting studies on touch, and what
Mhm.
they have found that when someone touches you, if it's an appropriate touch for the relationship, then it's comfortable and it causes again it's you can get the chemical response, but under the skin we've got all these chemicals. But if it's an inappropriate touch, it obviously goes in reverse. And they did a
Mm.
study, this is one I learned about many years ago, of librarians. And when someone would return the library card, they were instructed with some people, and it was random, to when they take the card to just slightly touch the hand or take the card with no touch. They found when they used a light touch, even the other person might not have been aware of, that person stopped and engaged in conversation and connection more than if they just took the card without any touch. Right? So that was just
Mhm.
one study. So touch definitely has a chemical response because we've got chemicals under the skin. Women are often more responsive to touch than men because of that chemical factor, and it's not
Mhm.
because a man can't, but or a woman can. It's relative. That's one of the gender differences. So for a
Mm.
woman, touch is vital. Might not be as more important for men. Sometimes they might have more of that because we can't say all men are in this mold and all women are in that mold. We can vary feminine and masculine within that. So it comes back to women love to be touched. So if you're in a romantic relationship, touch is very powerful in bringing that connection and building that relationship biochemically, physically, mentally, emotionally, where you can have that level of intimacy. Okay.
Mhm.
Whereas if someone touches you roughly, you really pull back. If we grab a child, for example, that child's going to resist because that touch is not comfortable. And one of the
Mhm.
things we teach children today is if you, a stranger danger, that if someone you don't know, or even if you know, touches you and you're not comfortable, leave and go and tell someone.
Mhm.
Because touch is vital in how we connect. The right touch in a friendship, in a marital or romantic relationship is powerful in bringing about that bonding, that connection. It's part of, we
Mhm.
can't separate. So does that make
Yeah.
sense?
That
Hmm.
answers that question. Also, another question that popped up now in my head is that certain people, and I know for myself as well, that um, what makes it uncomfortable, even just friendly touch, or what has gone wrong in the person's mind, or I guess what trauma can trigger it that touch is
Okay.
uncomfortable.
Okay. When touch is uncomfortable, the person touching you has the wrong energy, biochemical dynamic. It's self serving for that person and they're doing it for a reason, right? And often it's about the power of persuasion and or getting you to do something, or they don't realize that they're actually disconnected and they're touching you. When
Mm.
someone is connected on that mind and heart level, touch is very comfortable. When it's got an ulterior motive or it's inappropriate because that person, often this is where abuse comes in, wanting to control someone, abuse someone, that, yeah,
Mhm.
so you've got two totally different levels of connection, physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually.
Mhm. Okay, so we discussed the importance of physical touch as well, Jenifer. So, what about overall spending time with kids, especially, but with loved ones? What's the importance of that?
Okay. To have good connected relationships, we need to have what I call quality time with those people. Okay. It's about
Mhm.
bonding, connecting, and this is where isolation is so damaging. And we've already had a lot of that with the pandemic, and it did a lot of damage. They're finding that the fallout from that now. So, to heal that damage, we need to reconnect, and that means we've got to spend time with people. How often do children say, "Oh, mum and dad were always working and busy?" And, children especially need that time, need that affection, need that bonding and connection. So do loved ones. If
Mm,
you love someone and you don't spend time with them, and that's where when you reconnect, if that bond's not already there, because when you have that bond, even if you're not with them physically, you feel that connection, that heart connection is maintained. Does that make sense?
mhm.
Heart spirit
Yeah.
connection. Okay. So, but definitely time is the essence. And this is a problem today with people with their mortgages and doing too much and workaholic syndrome or just not well. There's so many things happening that their relationships get neglected. So their quality of life deteriorates because I believe relationships are life. When you
Mm,
have a look at it, without a relationship in our life, totally isolated is total depression. So, how can we improve on that? And definitely, time is an essence. Make time, and even for pets, interestingly, they suffer because they're part of
mm.
our family. If you don't, and because I don't have children, I've got my pets. I notice if I'm out a lot and they get a bit agitated, and it's the same. Children more so. So this
Mm.
is where time is of essence, definitely.
Yes,
It
and
builds
I'm
trust as well.
and I know that April actually voices that quite often these days and
Mm,
says, Mummy, can we spend some time together? And I'm like, but we
mm.
are. And I can see that she wants us to sit right next to her and spend time like that. So
Yeah,
I guess it makes a difference, not just living together in the
yes.
same house,
No.
but yeah.
She wants the touch, she wants the connection, not just you saying, I'm in the same room.
Mm.
Same with everyone. You've got a friend and they come and visit and they're busy doing other things, and the end of it, they go, oh, it's good to see you again. Because I've had friends who visited, but sometimes they're busy running off visiting others, and I'm going, what happened? You lose that connection. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it is, and it's all the things we've been talking about, that intimacy, that biochemical response, that bondedness, that giving attention, not stop looking at yourself and saying, no, I've got to give my attention. I've got to go and spend time with that person. And touch is a powerful part of that. Just sitting
Yeah.
next to someone, close to a child, putting your hand on their leg there, or, arm around them, or hold their hand. Very powerful for children. They feel
Yes,
loved. Mm.
that's true. It makes sense as well when I think about me and my mum. We talk on the phone
Mm-hmm.
quite often and video chat and everything, but it's just not the same when we go overseas and spend that time with her.
Yes, in the
So
same place. Yes.
yes, that's
Oh,
right.
dear. It is
Um,
true. My upbringing, because of my age, was with the what we called the end of the Victorian era, where stiff upper lip, you don't touch, children are seen and not heard, so you don't express feelings. And I know I suffered because I needed that. And it's nice to know, yes, I know my mother loved me. My father loved me. He was hardly ever home. He was working, but touch was not included. But I think the compensation was having animals and pets at that time, which is how my mother coped. So I had to learn how to connect healthily with people as I grew up in the way we've been talking about, because I
mhm.
wanted, wasn't enough to just have time that mum's there. It's also connectedness, which is so
Mm,
important. Mm.
it is, yeah. So yeah, that is wonderful. And also, we talked about expressing gratitude, of
Hmm.
course. So, what about when the Bible says it is more blessed to give than to receive? Is there actually
Hmm.
any science to that we're happier when we give rather than when we receive?
Mm. I'd have to look up specific studies, but I do know
Mm.
the art of, once we focus on self, there's a definite decline, right? But when we focus out and we give, I mean, I like getting gifts, but it gives me more joy to give, to see the person and receiving it. You know, there are people say, oh, that's nice of you to give me that, and walk off. I want them to open it. I want them to see the gift. But even just gifts of money, we give to people. If I give to a charity where I know it's helping children or animals, I feel so blessed by that. Because one, I've been given the money to spend on those things. Not everyone can do that. But also, I find there's more value in giving just emotionally and the way I feel. And if this is where I find people who are depressed are not giving, and they're not receiving either, because when you're depressed, you isolate. And one of the things I get people to do is go and do a charity work, go and do some volunteer work. Huge difference, because they're going and giving to others because they've lost that capacity to do something for someone else. So
Yeah.
part of it is, what can we do for someone? Can you go to the supermarket today, and even if you're depressed, smile at that little old lady and help her with a trolley? Or so we put in tasks that are actually other-centered and giving something. So it's not just about presence, it's about what we do for people, what we give to people. And you do get the blessings. It uplifts the mood. I just find people respond. You can make good friends that way. There are so many blessings from doing that. It's true.
Yeah, that is very true. And I also remember Ellen White actually speaks about that, about Isaiah
Mm.
58, that is actually a sure remedy for any mind ailments. And she talks about Isaiah 58, sharing your bread to the hungry and extending,
Absolutely.
your
Yeah,
soul to
yeah.
the,
It
yeah.
is. Doing good for others does you more good than them always doing good for you. And sure, if you're in need and someone then, because when you give a lot, people will want to give back. And I find often when I need something, I have to learn to then be a grateful receiver. I was brought up with, oh, you never take anything, you just give, which is lopsided. So with my mother, if I gave her something nice, she'd give me $20. She wanted to pay for it. And I'm saying, no, I just want to give it to you. But she couldn't. This is the gratitude. I need to have gratitude. I had to learn to have gratitude for what people give me and say, thank you. That's so good of you to do that. Versus, oh, no, I don't need that. You don't need to do that.
True.
See the difference?
The
And
difference.
biochemically, emotionally, huge difference.
It makes others happy as well. So you got to allow them to do
Yes.
that for you.
Yeah, people love to give. If they love to give and you knock it back, then that's sad for them. Particularly kids. Kids will go out, and I know children will go out when they're very young, and they'll come in. They might have raided your garden, which you didn't want, but they come in, here, Mum, here's some flowers for you. And go, I told you not to pick flowers in my garden. Or, hey, you go, oh, thank you, darling, and give them a big hug and a kiss, and get a vase, a little vase or something, get them to put them in and keep watering them. So you teach them things. And then you might teach them how not to take all the flowers off of one plant. So this, you use it as a learning tool, but
True.
always be grateful. Children do things and they might make something and bring it. You go, oh, you're not very good colouring in, is it? Instead of going, oh, that's beautiful, thank you. You see how we
That's
we
true.
grow up, and we do it as adults.
That is
We
very
that's
true.
that the critical person. Yeah.
And I have to learn that as well, to
Hmm.
when my
We all
flowers are picked, to show gratitude before telling them off.
do. Oh
Um,
dear.
so I guess let's just touch a little bit more on this subject of early influences, Jennifer. You talked a bit about
Mhm.
that, but how can early influences affect our future relationships? And we will
Okay.
unpack more on this, of course, because this is
Yes,
all the way from conception to adulthood, right? So,
absolutely. Yes.
yes.
It's a huge topic. We've looked at different aspects of it. We've talked about some different stages, but there is actually a timeline that goes from conception in the past through to the future, whatever that holds. The
Mm-hmm.
only moment we have is the present. We cannot change the past. We can actually change the future direction, and that's something we're going to look at, whether it be in relationships or anything else. But we can't change a past, but we can certainly deal with it in the present. And this is where, as from a Christian perspective, where is God? God is only in the present moment. He knows the past, he knows the future,
Mm-hmm.
but he is in the present. So this is about how can we deal with things in the present? How can we learn from the past? And how can we stop projecting a future fear or what we think might happen? So that in itself is a topic. So we'll address that one in the next session.
Definitely. And we will talk in the next session as well. And for everyone who's going to join in the next session, we'll talk about how early influences, affect our future and our relationships, and also how we can prevent those influences or trauma affecting our
Yes,
future.
yes.
So we want to thank you very much for this session, Jenifer, and we want to encourage everyone to join us for the next session. And also reminding everyone that if you have any questions on this session, please send us your questions. Email us at takechargeofyourhealth101@gmail.com. Let us know what questions you have, and we will try to address them on our next sessions or have a Q&A session separately. We will see how we go. So that's it for this session. Would you close with a word of prayer for us, Jenifer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the privilege of being able to share this topic and help each other, because relationships are just so important and so vital for our well-being, for how we grow in your grace. And we know our relationship with you is the most important. So please bless each one of us and those who are listening today, and help us to have a full relationship with you that we can then heal and grow and relate to others. We pray that you'll be with us in further sessions to help us to learn and grow together. And we are so blessed. We thank you, Lord, for all your blessings. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Wonderful. See you on the next session, Jenifer.
You will.